Hey, Joseph, thanks for your work in week 8. Wanted to send you a video reply just to interact with you a little bit on this really challenging few lines in Romans 9 about not all who are of Israel being themselves Israel. And I think that basically um, what Paul is saying is that Israel as an embodied, messy reality over generations on the earth is the work of God, and that this work of God is such that um, whoever sort of survives as part of Israel over generations, as opposed to sort of parts of Israel in the past that have been woven out, like, say, Sadducees, who have no memory in Israel today, or subsequent generations claiming to be Sadducees or whatever, as opposed to people like that. The people who survive are the fruit of God's election. And so that means that the people that he is concerned about with the audience, the relatives of his that he mentions at the beginning that he's grieving over, that they're part of Israel by God's election, and that can't be revoked. It can't be set aside. God has sculpted them, you might say, as part of the people. So the key with this, obviously, is that Israel then is not, the people who are faithful or the people who are obedient to God. It is whoever sort of is part of this messy reality that knows themselves as Israel and calls out to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as their God, even if they do that wrongly or unrighteously or whatever. Um, so that's what I think is at stake in that claim. Not all who are of Israel are themselves Israel. The force of it is the relatives of Paul that are in view, who are unfaithful, are of Israel and themselves Israel, unlike other people who have not found themselves gathered into this living reality of Israel over generations, but instead, like, say, the 10 tribes of the north, mostly were woven out of the people by assimilation over generations in the distant past of Israel's life. So this is just, I think, a hard idea of Israel for us to get our arms around. We often want to reduce Israel to something that has like stable criteria. If you meet this criterion, you belong to Israel, and if you don't, you don't. And that's just not the sort of thing I think that Israel is, according to Paul. Um, so, as I say, and I think you highlighted this, Paul doesn't need to argue against some genetic notion of Israel, because no one in Israel or the audience has ever thought that it's about genetics. Genetics have never been enough. You can have children, but then have those children assimilated by foreign peoples, and then over generations totally forget any memory of belonging to Israel. So it's never been just a genetic reality. It's always been something that God sustains over generations, keeps the memory of the people alive, as it were. And that certainly involves people in Israel getting married and having children, and those children being raised to know themselves as Israel, remember themselves as Israel, and then themselves to marry and have children who do the same. I think that's assumed that that's part of the living reality of Israel. But of course, it also includes people who are born into Gentile peoples and then are adopted into Israel and then gain an inheritance intergenerationally in Israel's life. This would be some of the mothers of David and Jesus that are mentioned in the genealogy at the beginning of First Chronicles or in Matthew. People like Rahab of Jericho, a Canaanite, or Tamar, the sort of wife of Judah's sons, who then actually claims Judah's inheritance by um, uniting with Judah and gaining descendants for herself and the family that way. Anyway, that she's also of apparently Canaanite background. And the point is that Israel has never remembered itself as some kind of genetic, genetically traceable thing. It's always been an intergenerational reality that is composed of all kinds and innumerable ingredients, some of which is indeed procreation, but far more than that is what keeps the memory of Israel alive over generations. So that's what I think Paul is um, summoning or calling upon to make a claim on the non-Jewish audience. Remember, he describes them as of Gentile background, that while they have been joined to Abraham's promised family, this doesn't mean that God has rejected or set aside the parts of that family that have become hostile to the audience. God honors the promise that God has made to the ancestors, to whomever finds sort of the name of Israel's God on their lips as their God, even if they're unfaithful to God. God doesn't give up on them, and therefore the audience can't give up on them either. And in this way, Paul is sort of teaching the audience of Gentile background what makes the family of Abraham tick, what holds it together. And the fullness of this sort of unconditional and irrevocable love of God is the Messiah himself, who is how they have come to find themselves sort of grafted into this family. Hope that helps some. Difficult question. Feel free to reply with further questions or concerns or rebuttals if this doesn't quite land for you, but thought I would just send you a response after I read your responses here in week 8. Thanks again for your work.